Have you ever discovered something so late in life that it changed the way you remember your entire past? A truth that arrived decades after it should have, and suddenly, nothing in your life looked the same anymore. Joro was 70. He was one of those men who walked slowly not just because of age, but because life had taught him to move gently, carefully, as if he didn't want to disturb the world. He lived alone in a modest apartment on the east side of the city. A quiet neighborhood, a quiet building, and a quiet man. His days blended into one another. Morning tea, feeding the birds outside his window, watching people walk by as if they were characters in a film he was no longer part of. People admired his calmness, but they didn't know that silence can sometimes become heavy. And George carried a silence that was 40 years old. A silence hidden behind memories and even older regrets. One rainy afternoon, while he was sorting through the dusty storage room beneath the building, he came across a small wooden box. It was old, forgotten, wrapped with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the tag wasn't his. He didn't recognize the box at all, but the faint words on the label struck him like lightning. For George Whitman, if found, deliver immediately. And beneath that, a date. June 18th, 1984. 40 years ago. A lifetime ago. His throat tightened. His pulse quickened. Time seemed too slow. Inside the box was a single envelope load, by age, its edges delicate and cracked, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Emily. Her name? The woman he once believed he would grow old with. The woman who vanished without a goodbye, without a reason, without closure. George sat down right there on the cold floor, with rain tapping against the small window. A 70-year-old man holding a piece of his past like something fragile and sacred. He whispered her name, Emily. His voice trembled. With shaking hands, he opened the envelope. 2 pages. No more, but they were enough to rewrite everything he thought he knew. George, it began. If you're reading this, it means this truth reached you far later than it should have, just like everything else in my life. His breath caught. Emily wrote about the summer of 1980, for their laughter, their dreams, and how deeply she believed he was the man she wanted to build a life with. But something had happened. Something she never told him. She had fallen ill, seriously ill, and the doctors had told her things she believed George should never, ever hear. I didn't disappear because I stopped loving you, George, she wrote. I disappeared because I loved you too much to let my illness become your burden. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Emily had asked her sister to deliver the letter if things turned for the worse, but life, as it so often does, had its own plans. Her sister moved, married, lost the box, forgot about it, until it somehow resurfaced, decades later, in this dusty storage room. At the end of the letter, Emily wrote, if life gives you this letter, even years later, don't grow old carrying questions. Don't let silence steal your joy. Love bravely. Speak clearly, and find happiness even if it isn't with me. George closed the letter and pressed it against his heart. He didn't cry, at least not loudly, but inside him, after 40 silent years, something finally broke. And at the very same time, something finally healed. 4 days afterward, he walked as if time itself had shifted around him. He looked at old photographs differently. He looked at his past differently. He looked at his choices with a kind of softness he had never allowed himself. He took long walks by the river. He visited a cafe they used to go to together. He sat at their old table and for the first time in his life, spoke to her aloud. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to carry the truth? But deep down, he knew why. Emily had always been the type to carry her pain alone so others wouldn't have to. One afternoon, as George sat staring at the water, a voice pulled him back to the present. George Whitman, is that really you? He turned. It was David, his closest friend from decades earlier. The man he once shared everything with, until George disappeared after losing Emily. David sat beside him, and in a gentle voice said, you vanished, George, and I let you. I shouldn't have. Something inside George cracked open. He told David everything about the letter, about Emily, about the truth he had unknowingly carried for nearly half a lifetime. David listened the way only a 70-year-old man can listen. Slowly, carefully, without judgment. When George finished, David laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "It is not too late to start living again." In the weeks that followed, George began rebuilding the parts of his life he had abandoned. He visited his sister after years of distance. He apologized for shutting her out. They cried in each other's arms. He reconnected with his nephew, whom he barely knew. They talked for hours like old friends. He joined the community center, something he had always avoided, and was surprised to find himself enjoying it. He began helping at the local library on weekends, sorting books, recommending stories, talking softly with strangers who slowly became familiar faces. And then, on a quiet Wednesday evening, he met her. Lillian, 60, a retired teacher with silver hair, a warm laugh, and eyes that saw straight through people with compassion. They talked for hours about books, about memories, about life, and George felt something he had forgotten, the shape of warmth. Not love, not yet, but possibility. He felt Emilia's letter in his pocket and whispered inside himself, "Thank you." Months passed, and George's life grew lighter and brighter. One day, he found the courage to visit Emily's grave, a place he had avoided for years out of fear and grief. Standing there, he pressed the letter to his heart and said, "I know now, and I forgive you. I hope you found peace. I think I'm finally finding mine." He walked away with a steadier step, not fast, but full of presence. That evening, Lillian invited him to a small gathering at her home. Warm lights, soft music, a circle of close friends. George sat among them, listening, smiling, feeling for the first time in decades that he belonged somewhere. When he returned home, he placed Emily's letter in a new box, not to eat, but to honor it, and for the first time in 40 years, he slept without that old stone pressed against his chest. Growing older doesn't take life away from you. It gives life back in a quieter, deeper, truer form. As Emily wrote, "Love bravely, speak clearly, and find happiness even if it isn't with me." And George did. He finally did. If George's story touched your heart, if you saw even a small part of your own journey inside his, don't keep it inside. Share this video with someone who might need this reminder today. And if you want more stories like this, stories that stay with you, that speak to the second half of life, that bring clarity, healing, and that make sure to subscribe. New stories are on the way, and one of them may become the beginning of your next chapter. Thanks for watching.